Marcus Brubaker is your next speaker. Marcus is the research director of Borealis's AI labs in Toronto and in Waterloo. He is an assistant professor in the computer science department at York University, an adjunct professor at the University of Toronto's Department of Computer Science, and he's a Vector affiliate faculty. Originally from the US, actually the same province, or the same state that I lived in for a long time, he moved to Canada in 2001 to study, a program like yours, where he received his PhD in 2011, did postdocs at the Toyota Technological Institute in Chicago, another cool place, Toronto Rehabilitation Hospital, and the University of Toronto. His research interests span computer vision, machine learning, and statistics, and he's also the co-founder of a company, Structura Biotechnology, got it. And he's worked on a number of startups prior to joining Borealis. Please welcome Marcus.
Well, thank you, Garth, for that lovely introduction, and thank you to Vector for inviting me to speak and giving me the opportunity to talk to you. As Garth laid out, the opportunities right now for you are vast, and I think when I thought about what I wanted to talk to you about today, I realized that at the core of it, all of us, everybody here, we see AI as an exciting opportunity, but what do we want to actually do with it? We really want to have impact. We want to start that company, come up with that next product, change the way healthcare is delivered, change the way the economy works, change people's lives. And as I reflected a bit back on my career, I thought about the things that I've learned about how to actually do that. And so I want to share with you 3 different kind of lessons or points or suggestions about how to actually have impact with AI and machine learning technology, okay? And so we're just going to dive right in here with the first one, which is it's important to remember that technical advances are not impact. This is something that I think, my background is technical. I love getting down into the weeds and the math of new algorithms and new approaches, and it's very easy to lose sight of this. But they're not impact alone, right? And I want to illustrate this a little bit with a project that I worked on called STAN. And STAN goes back a ways, and in fact, the core algorithmic development that made STAN a successful project and a successful piece of technology actually goes back to this paper in 1987. And it looks like the font's got a little tweaked on me here, but that's okay. So hybrid Monte Carlo, you don't need to know what that is. Doesn't really matter that much. The point is, this was an algorithm that came out in the late 80s, and it was a way to do statistical inference. It was a way to do a certain type of statistical analysis. And by the late 90s, it was recognized as basically the right way, the best way, the ideal way to do this sort of analysis, okay? But as late as 2011, no one was really using it, okay? It was kind of widely recognized in statistics and elsewhere that, yes, this was better than what we were using, but people kept using the old algorithms, the old methods, that they worked okay, but they weren't good. We knew we could do better. And this led to the creation of a program called STAN. And what did STAN do? Well, it had a few new algorithmic pieces, but at the core of it, what it did was it took hybrid Monte Carlo, this algorithm that was invented in the 1980s, and it wrapped it. It made it easy and accessible for practitioners, for statisticians, for people in the applied sciences and humanities and social sciences to do the statistical analysis that they needed to do, but do it better and more flexibly and more powerfully with this algorithm of hybrid Monte Carlo. And so the first version of STAN was released in 2012. At the beginning, it was actually a pretty Spartan thing. It was a command line interface. It had some rough wrappers in R, if anybody here knows the programming language R. But fast forward a couple of years, and now there's a fair number of textbooks written around STAN. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of papers that have been written using STAN to do statistical analysis. It's used by Facebook for various data analytics projects. It's used by pollsters around the world. It's been used by physicists and others to analyze data. For instance, the detection of gravitational waves recently used STAN, well, recently, 2 or 3 years ago, used STAN to do some of its data analysis. And why is this? How did this come about? At the core of it, the technology itself was not enough, okay? It was there. We knew the algorithms. We knew they were better. It was clear, right? But what STAN did was it took a very powerful piece of technology, in this case a statistical analysis program or algorithm called hybrid Monte Carlo, and it packaged it up in the right way so that the people that really needed to use it, the people that really could benefit from it, we're able to actually get access to it. So applied statisticians, for instance. All right? So this is the first point that I want to make, and it's an important one because it's very easy to get swept up in the idea that, oh, I have this new image recognition algorithm, or I have this new translation algorithm that works so much better than whatever else is out there right now. And that's great. That's phenomenal. We need that. That has to be there. But that on its own, that's not enough. Okay? So we need to find the right people. We need to find the right problems. And so that leads me into my second point, which is it's important to be open to new ideas and new problems. And I want to tell a little bit of a story going back longer than I'd like to admit, back to when I was in grad school. So this was maybe, I don't know, 15 years ago or so. And I had to take courses, breadth courses. And some of you might have to do this as part of your program as well. Courses that are not necessarily things that you think you're going to be interested in. Okay? And so for me, that course was computational structural biology. Right? I hadn't taken a biology course since high school. I think I'd taken one biology course in my life. So I knew basically nothing about biology and didn't think it was interesting to me at all. But this was, of a list of options of things that I had to take, it was the least worst option I could find. Okay? I was not excited. But it turned out to actually be a really important, impactful, and transformative experience for me personally and for my career. Because in this course, I learned about a problem or a paradigm called electron cryomicroscopy. And cryo-EM, for short, is the computational portion of it. I won't go into the details now. If anyone's interested, feel free to find me afterwards. You probably can't get me to shut up about it. It takes images that look like this. These are these are images of individual proteins or biomolecules, so very, very small, difficult to image molecules, and trying to convert them into three-dimensional structures that look like this, that then can be used to develop new drugs, can be used to explore kind of the basic functioning at a cellular level of life. Right? And so I learned about this cryo-EM problem, and I worked on it a little bit. It turned into a course project, which led to a little bit of a side research project. And eventually, I had to put it aside. We had and move on, and I finished my thesis. But the problem stuck with me. It just kind of sat in the back of my brain as like, this is really cool and really interesting and potentially really, really impactful. And a couple of years later, I was speaking with a student, and it turns out he was really interested in this as well. So we started working on it again. And at the time, technology had been advancing in cryo-EM, and we realized that we were able to do something really important. The computational process of going from these images to this structure at the time would take weeks or months on large clusters with hundreds of nodes. And we were able to come up with algorithms that took that down to minutes or hours on just a single machine, right? And this was able to really, we viewed this as a way to really change the way this technology could be used, right? Making it way more accessible to solve more structures, do broader studies, do very different types of studies. And so this was a paper that came out in 2017 describing the algorithms and presenting an initial version of the software. And at the same time, pharma was getting interested, very, very interested in cryo-EM. And so we founded a startup called Structura that Garth alluded to in my introduction, with the goal of further developing this software, getting it ready for production, getting it ready for people to really use it in a serious way, and licensing it and selling it to pharma, and actually continuing to give it away for free to the academic community, which is where we had kind of come from. So it was founded in 2016. There we go. CryoSpark, the software that Structura produces, is used by over 350 different institutions in 25 countries around the world. It's been used to solve over 130 structures. There's about a half a dozen pharma companies that are currently licensing CryoSpark for internal use and testing, which puts Structura in a bit of a unique, or maybe not unique, but privileged position of being a startup where we've not actually had to take any VC funding or angel funding or anything like that. We've been actually able to generate enough revenue to sustain ourselves and to grow ourselves to this date. And so this is not necessarily an advertisement for Structura, but it's simply a statement of, good ideas and good problems can come from really surprising places, like a course that you really don't want to take, right? Or a a discussion with someone that you never really thought you'd talk to, right? Somebody surprising. You're seated next to somebody at a wedding or at some event like this where you're talking to someone that maybe you wouldn't have run into normally. And for me, this led to what has been effectively a career-defining problem for me in the foundation of a startup coming from a seemingly tedious and, at the time, seemingly irrelevant course. Okay, so third and final point here. Understanding the problem is hard. And this is something that I think, in some extent, the way that machine learning and AI has been taught traditionally actually makes worse. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But what I mean by this is actually really understanding what's the problem you're trying to solve, getting kind of down into the weeds of it. That is actually the hard part. And cryo-EM is a great example of this. I spent many hours talking to collaborators in biology, asking them very dumb questions, trying to understand the basics and things that for them were second nature. And they similarly asked me lots of questions that for me, it was second nature and was surprising that anybody would ask. And so it took a lot of work to bridge that gap and actually be able to come up with something that was impactful. But I want to talk about another project that I worked on in forensics, ballistic forensics in particular. So these are images of cartridge casings up here. And whenever a crime is committed with a gun, police will collect cartridge casings from a crime scene, and then they need to identify which firearm fired them. And the way that they do that right now, and I'm not kidding, so people that have seen things like NCIS and CSI and things like that might not believe this, but the way they do this right now is that they put two cartridge casings under a comparison microscope, you sit an expert in front of them, and you look at it, and you say, do I think these two things came from the same firearm? Yes or no? That's it. That's the way it works, honestly. So we saw this and we heard about it and we said, hey, that seems like a great opportunity for machine learning and computer vision techniques to come in here and do this automatically. We just scan things and we try to match the scans based on the markings that are left on the cartridge casings, which is what we did. Turns out, though, that was not the problem that they really needed solving right then and there. It was an interesting problem, and everybody said, yeah, that's great. You should try to do that. It'd be great if we could do that automatically in a reliable way. It turned out, in fact, that they needed something much simpler to start with. They needed to be able to sit down at a computer and look at a scan of this evidence and compare it and believe that if they came to a conclusion from those scans that they were looking at on the computer, that conclusion could be trusted and could be used in court, right? Now, this might seem strangely conservative and insanely detailed, but of course you have to think about this from the perspective of a criminal justice system. If they rely on something that doesn't work, if it turns out that there was a mistake or an error in the way that the process works or the accuracy was somehow lower for any reason, right? That is justice not served. That is somebody being sent to jail who should not have been, right? And so they're very conservative about this. And so what we ended up doing, excuse me, was actually running studies to simply say, look, if we scan evidence and we show them to experts, when they make their conclusions based off those scans, those conclusions are just as good as if they'd looked at the evidence itself. And now, based on this, and this study has been followed up and reproduced by the FBI and the RCMP and others, people are able to simply exchange files as opposed to actually sending physical evidence through the mail, which is what they used to do, okay? And so, and this is just an example, we developed a tool to make the comparisons easier for examiners, to enable them to do things like training and other such tasks. So identifying and really understanding what the real problem is at the core, right? That's the hard part, all right? Once we've defined the problem and found it, applying the techniques, applying the technology, it's work. It's not to minimize that, but to say it's very easy for us to forget about how hard it is just to find the right problem to solve, to have impact with the tools that we have. CryoEM took many discussions, actually over many years, and for Cadre and the forensics application, enabling that virtual comparison was actually a really important first step to getting the field comfortable with the technology that we were using. And now, of course, Cadre is continuing to develop work on matching software and things like that, which is where the more interesting, from a technical perspective, applications of machine learning and AI come in. And so all of this has kind of culminated for me in my work at Borealis. I haven't really talked too much about it. Borealis, for those of you that don't know, is the AI research and development arm of the Royal Bank of Canada. Our job at Borealis is to transform RBC by using state-of-the-art machine learning and AI algorithms, period. That's the job, okay? And a lot of this, all the things that I've just told you about are lessons that I have basically learned and relearned and seen again and again and again in my work as a research director at Borealis. Understanding that having the greatest algorithm on Earth doesn't really get you anywhere if you don't know how to apply it and you don't know where it fits within the context of a process or a business, right? When we learn about machine learning, for those of you that have taken ML courses and those of you that will, one of the things I'm going to encourage you to think about is you sit down to do an assignment and you're given the data. You're said, here's a pickle file, or here's a set of images or a text file, here's your input. And you're given an output. Here are labels for all those images. Here are the translations of the text, et cetera. You're given a metric. You're given a measure of success. You know, you're given classification accuracy, top-end accuracy. You're given average precision. You're given blue scores. You're given things like this. This is all given to you. You have basically been told, here is the problem, right? And in reality, getting to the stage where you know what the data is, when you know what the output is, when you know what the metric is, and it's a metric that you can actually evaluate, getting there is 90% of the work of actually applying AI and having an impact with it, okay? And that's something that we've been, that is basically our job at Borealis, to do that entire pipeline, right? To find the problems, define what they are, find the right technologies and the right algorithms to apply to it, and then turn it into a product that actually has an impact on the business and on the broader Canadian economy. So these are, just to summarize the 3 points, things to remember, and I hope you can walk away with. Remember, technical advances on their own, they're not enough. They're great, they're fun, they're fantastic, but in and of themselves, they won't get you where you want to go. Always be open to new ideas. You really never know where something interesting is going to come from. Literally, the idea for Cadre Forensics and that entire project was with a colleague of mine, a friend of mine, sitting down at a wedding next to somebody he had never met before who happened to be a forensic examiner. Right? That was the genesis of that entire company, that entire initiative. And understanding the problem and making sure you're working on the right problem, that's the hard part. Okay, with that, I don't know how I'm doing on time, but I will stop there, and thank you so much for your attention. And maybe afterwards, if anyone is interested in chatting further, feel free to come up and find me at the break at the end.